Joining us now is Brian Tyler Cohen. He's a YouTuber. He's had quite a bit of success recently, and we're very happy to have him here on the show. It's good to see you, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
Good seeing you too. Thanks for having me.
Brian, I am absolutely fascinated by the rise of your channel and of a few others. Not that you haven't been doing well in the past, but I think even you will say it's just been an absolute deluge and a bonanza very recently. And I've been curious, why you think that you've had quite a bit of success as mainstream channels like CNN or MSNBC have had a decline in ratings. What do you think about your rise, about Midas Touch and others really blowing past many of these traditional media companies recently?
I think it's a testament to how kind of fed up most of this country is with the lack of any stable or long-term, value set from legacy media. I mean, we've seen, depending on who comes in to helm any of these networks, suddenly their strategies change on a dime, and we see them either tilt right, tilt left, go full bore to the center. But there isn't any long-standing guiding principles at these networks, and I think it kind of betrays that what they stand for is whatever they're told that they stand for. And there's a lot of false equivalencies. There's a lot of both sidesism. And back in the day when we didn't have any other alternative, that's all we've got, right? Yeah. But I think now in an era where people can seek out content that's actually guided by some degree of longstanding principle, you guys are a testament to exactly that. I think people recognize that we don't have to just settle for media that decides what it is based on who becomes the new president or CEO that week.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that has been really different with Trump 2.0 among the Democratic base is their orientation both towards like MSNBC and CNN and also towards Democratic politicians themselves. I mean, back in 2016, it was nightly appointment viewing to watch Rachel Maddow. Like MSNBC was really sort of like the beating core of heart of the resistance. Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff were leading the charge. There was a sense like, okay, these guys are our guys. They're fighting for us. They're doing everything they possibly can. And we're all this sort of like unified army going to war against what we see happening here. And this time, you could tell it in the ratings. You could also tell it in the poll numbers about how Democratic voters are incredibly disenchanted with Democratic leadership in a way that certainly reminds me of the way Republicans felt about Republican leadership during the Tea Party era. Do you think that that's part of what's going on here? And to what do you attribute that level of discontent?
I think that there's two factions right now within the Democratic Party. I think that there is a faction that recognizes, and I would include myself in this faction, recognizes that we desperately need to fight against what we're seeing right now. And then there's another that I think is more focused on on risk aversion and so it's kind of tearing the party in two sides because you've got people who say it's like the moderate versus progressive wings, right? And so you have people who say, okay, we need to tack to the left and show some fight and push back against the worst excesses of this administration. And then you see the more moderate members of the party or of the wing who are saying it was the tacking left that got us into this position in the first place, and clearly America is having a rightward shift. And so I think that there's just some inherent conflict there, and as a result of that, the party seems rudderless. The networks that speak to Democrats kind of seem rudderless, and there's just this contradictory idea of where to go next.
Yeah, Brian, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is I really do think you guys, Midas Touch and others, are like the beating heart of like the Democratic Party right now for the future. And the reason I'm curious, just as an outside observer, is how do you feel about leadership, for example? Like we have this, we can put on the screen, the Axios tear sheet guys, Democrats privately confronting their Trump speech disruptors and others. They're very focused on decorum. They're more risk averse, as you said. So how is someone like you, really rising influencer, I think, in the Democratic Party with the younger Democratic base, how are you feeling about Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and the tack that they've decided to take in the Trump administration now?
Well, I think what we need to do is figure out how to really optimize in this media environment. And that's something that we haven't been able to do before. I actually went to D.C. this past week, and I spoke to a lot of members of the Democratic caucus in the House and the Senate. And it was my effort really to try and convince them and persuade them about the importance of kind of embracing social media, recognizing the importance of getting content creators in, moving a lot of our attention and focus from legacy media, where we've spent so much of our time talking to an audience that is already largely bought in, instead talking to an audience that is, not only bigger, because that's where social media audiences are, but also more persuadable. And look, to their credit, they were largely on board with all of this stuff. And so I think it's important. To try and shift a lot of the attitudes that have been cemented for a really, really long time in DC. And so that's kind of my focus right now, is to try and, insofar as I have any influence in this party, given what I do online, my focus right now is just trying to get a lot of people on board to change their habits in an institution that is as nimble as a cruise ship, basically.
Well, and as part of that trip, you were able to talk to AOC. Let's go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of what she had to say.
Listen, if your representative is not doing a town hall, give me a ring. I mean, I don't know if an R+25 district would have me, but I'm always willing to be proven wrong. And I'll say it right here, right now. If a deep red Republican district wants to have an honest conversation, even if it's with someone they disagree with, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to meet with Republicans and just be honest about where I stand, where they stand. We can explain, and understand each other better. But I definitely think it creates a vacuum. And even if it's not a Democratic member, people can host community town halls. You don't need a member of Congress to host a town hall, and just host one without them.
I think that's one of the better ideas that Democrats have floated. And really, it's sort of Bernie Sanders who's led the charge. I'm sure you saw the images from his town hall, like 10,000 people showing up on a random day in Warren, Michigan. Just astonishing level of energy, just because he's out there and basically signaling, like, we're going to fight, and here's something we can actually do. I know Ro Khanna said he's going to do town halls. Tim Walz has said he's going to do town halls. AOC saying she's going to do town halls. And it's been kind of interesting to me, the tactical or ideological valence of this moment, because one of the other big Democratic stars of the moment is Jasmine Crockett, who is not necessarily ideologically the same as Bernie Sanders. But I think there's such a base level excitement about these individuals simply because it feels like they're putting up a fight, and because they do understand the attention economy and how quickly the news moves and how much you have to jump on it right at that moment and not be afraid of stirring the pot and not be afraid of creating some controversy.
100%. I mean, that's how this entire ecosystem works. And I think that you're exactly right in terms of the thing that people want to see is that you are willing to fight. And this doesn't necessarily, to your exact point, have to be like a progressive versus moderate. It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be a certain political persuasion. You don't have to land somewhere specifically on the ideological spectrum to be able to do this. People just want to see that you are there doing the job that they put you in office to do. And so that's why there's a lot of focus on these people who are actually getting themselves out there and showing that they're willing to have some fight. And it doesn't have, look, we're in a position right now where we're in the majority. We don't have to be relitigating Medicare for all today, because it's not like any of that stuff is going to happen. But if you're going out there and you're saying, look, I'm here to make sure that your Medicaid is protected, to make sure that SNAP benefits are protected, to make sure that education funding or any healthcare funding or that veterans have jobs. If I'm putting myself out there showing that I'm willing to actually do the work, people are going to respond to that. It is precisely the unwillingness or inability of anybody in office to actually stick their necks out there and show that they're willing to fight. It is that same risk aversion that I was talking about before that people are actually tired of these days, and kind of puts you in that camp of doing stuff that's safe and uncontroversial, and like people don't want to see that. We're in a moment where democracy is at risk, where healthcare is at risk, where so much of what we hold dear is at risk. And if you're just going to kind of sit back, people are going to recognize that. So again, it doesn't have to do with how progressive or how moderate you are. It's just that you're putting yourself out there and that you're showing you're willing to fight.
Yeah, I want to dig down on that a little bit, though. Something I watched during the Tea Party era is that opposition to Obama really became like the unifying force of the Republican Party. But then after Obama was gone, there were huge fights. And those litmus tests on policy, those things mattered. You talked there about Medicare for all. So I'm curious at a policy level. I watched some of your channel, and a lot of it is just about Donald Trump. That seems to be the stuff that really is most animating right now. But sooner or later, might actually win an election. You might be in power. So what are the types of things that you think do matter, for a future Democratic leader? Republicans at that time said you need to figure about, you need to be concerned about debt. We need to repeal Obamacare. Well, no matter what you want to say about the Tea Party, they did have some demands. What are some of the demands that you think you have, Brian?
Well, first of all, we should be so lucky to be in a position where we can start litigating the things that matter to Democrats, but hopefully we do get there soon. I mean, look, I'm a progressive. What I would like to see is full-bore Green New Deal. I would like to see Medicare for all. I would like to see a $15 minimum wage. I would like to see the PRO Act get passed so that we can bolster unions in this country. But I view myself as a pragmatic progressive, and I know that what's going to work in certain places may not necessarily work in other places. So, I'm perfectly content to, if we're lucky enough to be able to get in a position where we can, again, litigate this stuff, I would love to be able to have these conversations and have these debates with folks. My focus, obviously, right now, as is the same for any Democrat, is just to get in a position where we can actually be able to exercise power, and that's going to take a lot of changes from our strategy right now, because it feels like, it feels a million miles away at this moment, but it also depends on Democrats actually being able to be willing to wield power once we do get into office. And so often there's a huge difference between what Republicans do with power when they're in office and what Democrats do with power in office. And I think the perfect encapsulation of that is what happens with the parliamentarian. Like, for the Democrats, the parliamentarian says no, and we're like, well, that's it. The parliamentarian says no, so I guess there's no other avenue, and we just have to kind of sit down and lick our wounds, and that's the end of the fight. Republicans will and literally have just replaced the parliamentarian altogether if they don't get what they want. And that is how they view power. They figure out how they can get there. It's almost like Republicans, if they get told no, they figure out how they can get to yes. If Democrats get told no, they're perfectly content to accept that, and it almost sometimes feels like they're not even willing to try and get to yes. And so that's what I would like to see if Democrats actually get into power, notwithstanding what I would like to see on the specific policy front. And again, I listed a bunch of things that I would like to see on the policy front right there, but just more broadly, a focus on actually being able to wield and exercise power in the rare instances, rare opportunities where we actually get it.
I was curious what you made. I'm sure you saw the Gavin Newsom, Charlie Kirk podcast situation. And I'll tell you, I'm not a Gavin Newsom fan because I think he's, way too corporate and, puts donors ahead of progressive values often. But I do respect his political talent. I saw him go on Fox News and really take it to Ron DeSantis. I think a lot of people like that, certainly increased my estimation of him. I think a lot of Democratic base voters felt the same way. And so when I saw he was doing this podcast and he was having a few right-wing folks on, including Charlie Kirk, I was like, oh, that's actually really smart because he can fight with him and people are going to freaking love that. And then he has him on. He's like, oh my God, Charlie, you're so influential and my son loves you. And let's talk about some issues where I want to culturally shift more towards your position and find common ground, et cetera. Putting aside my positions on that issue and how grotesque I find that to be, I also just found it to be so tone deaf for the political moment, because if he actually, this man obviously wants to be president, and if you actually want to position yourself in that way, then what you need to be doing is demonstrating that you will show up and debate these people. You will hold them to account. You will demonstrate that you're a fighter. I mean, to what do you attribute that total tone deafness about what the Democratic base actually wants to see from a politician like him right now?
Yeah, I think the main thing is he wanted to show himself as being more willing to embrace like the 80 side of that 80-20 issue. But I think to your exact point, look, the biggest virtue for someone like Gavin Newsom, and something that obviously I find really attractive about him as a candidate, is that he is willing to get out there and fight. He is willing to go on Fox News and defend his positions, defend his values, stand on business. And that's something that's in short supply in the Democratic Party. And so it is a great idea to have a podcast where you invite folks from the other side on and actually try and stand up and defend your values. That's something that we desperately need in Democratic politics. And so it was disappointing to see that he was so effusive in his praise for Charlie Kirk because, again, his biggest virtue is that he is able to fight. And so when you sacrifice then if you sacrifice your biggest asset as a candidate, then that really does hurt how people, I think, perceive you more broadly. This isn't a time right now. Your stance on the issues notwithstanding, this isn't a time right now to lay down arms and show that you're willing to just fully embrace not only folks on the right, but just bad faith folks on the right, people who are doing this as solely political actors. And so, I know that he's going to do more episodes in this series. I think that the reaction to this might be exactly what he was looking for. He might be looking for some praise, some pets from right-wingers, and even if it's at the risk of, pissing off some Democrats, so be it. But I would like to see him actually stand up and fight for the things that he believes in, because that's really where he's derived so much of his popularity and strength prior to doing this.
Brian, let me ask you, what is your retrospective take on what went wrong in the election? Unlike us, you actually got to interview Joe Biden. You met him while he was in the Oval Office. So what is your grand theory of why Democrats lost in this election?
I think it's two things. Three things. First is the economy. I think that we saw the ways in which the high inflation, the global phenomenon of high inflation, led to incumbents or governing parties getting ousted across the world. I think Mexico's president was the only one to be able to withstand that. But a lot of people in this country, sadly, just don't pay attention to politics, but they do pay attention to the costs that impact their lives. And so if costs are higher, they're going to punish the people in charge. The people in charge were the Democrats. The second is, I think that the big disadvantage for the Democrats in this media ecosystem is just the size and scope of right-wing media. And so if you have an issue like gender reassignment surgeries among trans inmates in prison, which is an issue that Kamala spoke about in 2019 and has disavowed in this past election cycle, if Republicans have the amount of people and the amount of money to be able to put this message in front of everybody, then they can kind of create the reality that they want to create. And Democrats don't have anything to push back against it. I mean, the Democratic Party never bothered bolstering their own independent media ecosystem, even though 10 years ago, the Republicans started building up Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones. And so they have these folks who are willing to push the narrative through in a expressly political way that the Democrats just can't do, because our message distribution system has always been CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times. And a lot of these networks are perfectly willing to take the messages that are being fed to them by right-wing media. And so what you're left with is 69 cover stories about Hillary's emails, for example, in the 2016 election, because Republicans are willing to just exercise overtly partisan voices, and the Democrats or liberal media will always bite on that. And so there's this huge asymmetry where whatever narrative Republicans want to perpetuate, they do, and then liberal media, which we've decided is, again, our message distribution system, is perfectly content to bite on all of that stuff. And so those are two of the main things. And then obviously, look, in retrospect, I think that the only answer would have been immediately after Joe Biden, either won in 2020 or Democrats had a strong performance in 2022, that he drops out and we figure out, a new way forward that also includes a candidate who is willing to show some distance between him or her and Joe Biden.
Yep.
And look, I understand too, because it's for somebody who had just beaten Donald Trump by 8 million votes. To say, okay, now I have no mandate to continue, I get it. regardless of whether or not I agree with it, I understand it. Same deal with midterms. If you look at somebody who just presided over a strong midterm performance in what was supposed to be a red wave year, again, hard to say that there's some huge mandate. And yes, I sat down with him, and you can watch the interview. It's completely unedited. It's difficult to look at that and to see that it was the same guy who would be on that debate stage two summers from then, and think that it's the same person. But his decline was pretty precipitous in that respect, and so I think between those three, that's kind of what led to the position where we're in right now.
Yeah, well, aging is also very uneven, so he could be cogent at one point and then completely not cogent another moment, which is some of what has come out from his aides, after the fact, belatedly, after it was too late to do anything or ultimately change course. The last question I have for you is, as YouTubers, like, we all have a feel for our audiences and like, oh, this segment, this headline, this is really gonna pop, this is really gonna click. What is your sense of what is sort of like most animating about Trump 2.0? For your audience? Is it Elon and Doge? Is it immigration? Is it the trade war with Canada? Like, what are the particular issues or the particular threats from this Trump administration that have really animated your audience and caused them really to flock to you in droves?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the Elon stuff is especially potent because even, ironically enough, even at the same exact moment as you have Republicans railing against unelected bureaucrats, you have an unelected bureaucrat who is aggressively unpopular, not just for Democrats, but especially for Republicans. And this is an issue that, look, the important thing in politics is that you find issues that unite your party and divide the other party. And Elon is exactly that issue. Democrats are united in their disdain for somebody who's going to go in with a hatchet and unilaterally try and destroy agencies that do good, try and destroy programs, life-saving programs and lifelines for the American people that are overwhelmingly popular. And so that's an issue that I think has really driven a lot of attention on YouTube especially. And also, look, there's a big international audience on YouTube. I mean, it's the biggest platform in the world. And so even as Trump continues his attacks against countries that are our allies, countries like Canada, countries like Mexico, European countries, that's driving a lot of interest too, because suddenly this clown show that was isolated to just within our borders is seeping out across the world. It's having impacts in Russia and Ukraine and China and Europe and South America. And so there are a lot of people suddenly paying attention because this isn't like a not my circus, not my monkey situation. Now we're all part of the circus. And so everybody has a vested interest in paying attention.
Yeah. My last question for you, Brian, is how do you view yourself in this role? So there's been a variety of theories. As you said, you mentioned Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is kind of a YouTube podcast, but is ultimately like an actual political force. We've seen previous efforts like Cenk Uygur or somebody else's husband here who formed the Justice Democrats, right? Trying to push forward an agenda. Well, what do you think about your own role as you continue to rise with a lot of the Democratic base?
It's a really good question, and I've never been asked that. Look, I try to be. I'm trying to reach as many people as I can that in a kind of a space for where expats from legacy media feel like they have somebody who kind of can speak on their wavelength. I try to position myself with the majority of, I think, what the party, what like regular Democrats think. There's also the fact that because I've been lucky enough to have access to Democratic politicians, I'm trying to use the position that I have to be able to foster some change from the inside of the actual party itself. Mm-hmm. And if I have the opportunity to go and speak to these folks, use that voice to try and push for more of an embrace on independent media. And I know that a lot of people in this space, in this ecosystem, don't have that kind of access. And so if I do, I'm going to try to use it to the best of my ability and for the betterment of the party more broadly. And so if I have the ability to go up on the Hill and speak to folks, I'm going to use that not to be as hostile as I can, but instead to say, like, look, I do think it's important that we embrace independent media. I do think it's important that you start to talk to content creators. I do think it's important that we have a posture where y'all are going out and being willing to fight, because that's what the majority of my audience, that's what the majority of, I think, the party more broadly wants to see. And so a little bit of a different positioning than I think the vast majority of YouTubers out there. But look, insofar as I have any influence, I'm trying to use it in the most helpful way possible.
Got it. Well, I really enjoyed talking to you, man, and I'll be paying attention. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brian. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.